Nigeria, Africa's largest economy, continued its downward turn on the overall Global Competitive Index, GCI, as the country fell 7 places from 120th to 127th this year out of 144 economies. The reason was largely on the back of weakened public finances as a result, of course, of lower oil prices and export. Considering the basic requirements sub-index, which is actually one of the critical components of that GCI, we fell 4 places from 136th to 140th position in 2015. Comprises of institutions, that's 129th. Infrastructure, we were 134th. Macroeconomic environment, we featured 76th. Health and primary education, we were second to last at 143. This remains weak, with insufficiently protected human rights, high corruption, and undue influence. Furthermore, we are not harnessing the latest technologies for productivity enhancements, as demonstrated by the low rates of ICT penetration. However, Nigeria could continue to benefit from its relatively large market size, that's the demographic dividend, which bears the potential for significant economies of scale, a relatively efficient labor market driven by flexibility and solid financial market, following its gradual recovery from the 2009 crisis. However, poor availability and affordability of finance in general, especially to the SME sector, and difficulties in obtaining credit, in particular, we were 137th, remains significant bottleneck to economic growth. There is no gainsaying the fact that the symptoms connected to the ratings include high unemployment, which actually hovers around 26.52%, and B, 70% of our population living below the poverty line, according to McKinsey Global Institute. That translates to about 130 million people. Low developmental indices rankings, and in the past 10 years, Nigeria's economy had grown at the average rate of 7% per annum. However, it had been estimated that that growth will be at the rate of under 4% this year. The 10% growth rate is not commensurate with employment growth, for example. If you have looked at the employment statistics, it wasn't in consonant with the GDP growth rate. Now that would have negative impact on the average citizen. The oil sector continues to be the largest contributor to export earnings and the federal government's revenue. The sector has, however, faced a number of challenges in recent years, ranging from slower output growth, vandalism and theft, an uncertainty regulatory environment, low levels of investment, and more recently, declining crude oil prices in the international market. The combined effects of these factors have led to about 50% reduction in the federal government's revenues and pressure on the naira due to the reduced export earnings. Many experts believe that the decline in international oil prices have come to stay. So how can we meet the challenge of increasing our competitiveness to achieve inclusive growth in a non-oil economy? As an emerging nation with developing institutions and governance structures, Nigeria faces significant challenges in building a stable business environment, as she ranked 170th out of 189 nations in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index. The security situation has made that challenge more pronounced, despite some successes against Boko Haram in the northeast, and also rampant kidnappings for ransom in other parts of the country. security still remains a big threat. We acknowledge the significant improvement recorded in the power sector since the inception of this administration. This administration has demonstrated a rare dedication and determination to providing stable and constant electricity to all Nigerians. Power generation, for the first time in Nigeria, has risen to an all-time high of 4,748 megawatts in August 2015. This fiat was as a result of concerted effort towards tackling corruption, wheeling capability of the Transmission Company of Nigeria, and implementation of real-time online power optimization tools developed by the country's National Control Center, and stable and adequate gas supply occasioned by the suppression of frequent vandalism of gas distribution assets. Though these improvements are laudable, they are merely the beginning of desired change required in the power sector. As at today, over 56% of Nigerian population have no access to grid electricity, and those who are connected to the grid face substantial power disruptions. An estimated 41% of Nigerian businesses generate their own power supply to augment the national grid supply, according to a recent World Bank report. Nigeria lags far behind other developing nations in terms of grid-based electricity consumption, with 126 kilowatt per capita. Based on Nigeria's GDP and global trends, electricity consumption should be at least 5 times where we are today. We commend the present administration for the ongoing restructuring of the state-owned Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. However, for the 4th year running, we must appeal to our legislators to work on the Petroleum Industry Bill and bring it to a positive conclusion. This bill contains provisions to redefine and change the oil and gas sector, and in line with the philosophy of NESG, to turn the NNPC into a private commercial enterprise, and so cease to be a wholly owned government entity. The how. The key thrust of this year's summit is to facilitate stakeholders' discussions and agreements about how best to achieve competitiveness and inclusive growth in a sustainable manner through measurable outcomes. Key outcomes will include specific recommendations on how to create jobs, dismantle the pillars of corruption, establish and build upon pillars of sustainable growth and development, some of which include macroeconomic stability and growth, SME growth, institutional reforms, and in general, competitiveness. Align our homegrown long-term development agenda with the UN Sustainable Development Goals that will take effect from January 2016. There is a strong need for the public sector to partner with the private sector to drive the UN SDGs, so that the mistake of the MDGs should not be repeated. We must also emphasize the need for strong will to execute on the part of all stakeholders, particularly the government. To this end, the summit will recommend appropriate accountability frameworks, which, coupled with other how-tos, will ensure the emergence of a truly prosperous nation. This summit is going to be unique, given the recent transition in administration in our dear country. It also promises to be engaging, interactive, and will profile recommendations to achieve inclusive and competitive Nigeria. Mr. President, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to NES 21. Happy deliberations.
Your Excellencies, he delivered with such authority and smoothness. Can we put our hands together one more time? Thank you very much. And like he said in his address, the change mantra is doing two things. One, pulling down the pillars of corruption and erecting new structures of transparency. No wonder Robert Greene, in his wonderful book, 48 Laws of Power, said that change is slow and gradual. It requires hard work, a bit of luck, a fair amount of self-sacrifice, and a lot of patience. And that's what's driving our nation now. And since 1993, that the Nigerian Economic Summit Group have been partnering with the National Planning Ministry. It has been a wonderful partnership. This year, the group is particularly grateful to the National Planning Commission for the incredible support to ensure that this next 21 is a resounding success. It's therefore my honor and pleasure to welcome here the Secretary of the National Planning Commission, Mr. Bassi Akbayo.